If we look at the Vatican from the Quirinal hill on the northern side of the basilica, we can see a curious structure. This is the Nicchione del Belvedere, which crowns the former Belvedere Palace, the highest building of the Vatican museums. The museums hold the papal art collections, presided over by the Vatican Prime Minister.
Vatican Museum is under my authority, under my competence. But naturally, I have a director there who is really in charge of the museum. And we have about 400 people working in the museum. Now, a number of them are custodians or guards. You know, we have to have them placed all over the museum to prevent theft or anything like that. It's a very large museum. If you walk through the whole thing, you have to walk 7 kilometers.
Il Louvre raggiunge le 2000 unità.
The Louvre has 2,000 employees. The Metropolitan Museum employs over 1,000 people, about 1,300. With our staff numbering only 450, they are kept very busy.
Il livello di accoglienza e di ricerca all'interno dei musei vaticani.
Even here, we deal with typical Vatican administration. The Vatican museums are works of art in themselves. An Art Nouveau lift takes us to the ultra-modern inner courtyard, entered by a ramp built in the year 2000, and exited via a modernistic spiral staircase. The courtyard connects the different museum buildings, which date back to the Renaissance period. A rare view of empty rooms and corridors of the museum. In a moment, these spacious interiors will be filled with thousands of tourists from all over the world who are waiting patiently for the museum gates to be opened. Gates that the Vatican opens are as wide as possible because the museums receive no governmental subsidies. Earnings from the entry tickets maintain the museum's entire artistic heritage. They also pay for standing charges and employees' salaries, all essential costs. We are one of the few museums in the world which is able to cover the costs of maintenance from entry tickets.
Museo al mondo che con il biglietto d'ingresso riesce a coprire tutte le spese per il proprio mantenimento.
The Vatican museums consist of 4 museums divided into 3 of 4 collections and a complex of former papal chapels, apartments, and assembly halls. But before we take a look at the history and composition of any collection, we must consider the questions of its security. Unfortunately, there have been thefts in recent years. But in such cases, we also cooperate with the Italian maintenance forces, competent officers such as the Group of Carabinieri for the Defense of Artistic Heritage. It's today known as the Cultural Heritage Defense and Financial Guard. The Pio Clementino Museum is the oldest compact Vatican collection of ancient statues, mosaics, animal sculptures, and sarcophaguses. The name of the museum commemorates two popes, Clemens XIV and Pius VI. To them, we owe the construction of the building housing ancient works of art, which were scattered throughout the Vatican and papal palaces. Ennio Visconti designed the museum's 11 rooms. Sculptures of animals, busts of gods and goddesses and Roman citizens were collected separately, as were mosaics and sarcophaguses. Pio Clementino is also the first Vatican museum where exhibits were collected to preserve them for future generations. It's difficult to imagine a thief carrying off one of the ancient statues. Well, the market for works of art stolen from the museum is practically non-existent. A picture of almost every one of these sculptures can be found in any history of art book. The uniqueness of ancient sculptures is an efficient barrier to possible robbers. It's not the only barrier, though. All objects in the Vatican museums are on the territory of the Vatican state and therefore hardly accessible to thieves. Also, we have international insurance for all the works. Some exhibits in the Vatican collections are insured for as little as €1. They have no market value. This is in contrast to their artistic value, which we cannot compare to any amount of money. The museums are trying not to tempt fate. Cases of lending the Vatican's works of art are incredibly rare. There are works which should never be moved from the museums, paintings, statues. There's always some risk in doing it. It's because of some cultural issues, international relations, and for political reasons as well. But surely it wouldn't be okay to put at risk the great heritage which should be passed on to future generations. The Octagon. The place contains ancient sculptures which once stood in the former Garden of Sculptures, established by Pope Julius II. Over the entrance into the garden, Julius had the following inscription placed: "Go away, the unworthy." Here, the history of papal antiquities in the Vatican museums begins.
I Vaticani nascono come, diciamo, collezioni di scultura antica.
The Vatican museums were established as collections of antique Roman sculpture. The first sculpture, placed here in 1506 during the reign of Julius II, was the group of Laocoon. Bodies in a mortal embrace, a moment of fighting and agony, nakedness, pagan sculptures in the Vatican. In the time of Julius II, this could be shocking, but these antique sculptures heralded the dawn of a new era. In the early 15th century, people began to say, "Oh God, it's not us, it's not our identity, it's an import, a cultural import. And antiquity, our antiquity, is more meaningful, let's return to it." The Belvedere torso, another sculpture from the garden of Pope Julius. This dynamic pose, the realism in which the human body is presented, inspired and helped develop this style of figurative painting, full of expression and internal energy used by Michelangelo in his frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. The collection of Julius II was private. It was only the beginning. The museum was established during the pontificate of Clemens XIII in the middle of the 18th century. The Pope appointed a museum director and told him to hire guards. The first illustrated museum guide is published too. At the end of the 18th century, the threat of complete destruction looms over the Papal States. Europe, plunging into turmoil of the Napoleonic Wars, is no longer the place for museums. The French Republic, following the example of the Roman Empire, is a threat, and even the Pope is helpless. Napoleon wanted to collect all the treasures from the countries he had conquered and house them in a Hôtel de Soubise in Paris. He took a lot from here, but most of it was returned after the Congress of Vienna in 1815. But many things disappeared. Napoleon had the Vatican collections transported to Paris. It wasn't until the Congress of Vienna ordered France to return the stolen works that they returned to the Vatican. About 70% of the works of art taken during the Napoleonic period were recovered. The rest were voluntarily given to France by the Pope. The return of the stolen pieces was another beginning in the history of the museums. Antonio Canova, the director newly appointed by Pius VII, introduced a set of regulations for the museum, defining their opening hours and the days when the museums would be closed to the public. Museums personnel were increased. In the middle of the 19th century, the staff were given uniforms and fixed salaries. Also, new departments were formed. Belvedere Apollo. The sculpture was purchased by Julius II when he was still a cardinal. Julius wasn't afraid of antiquity. He saw inspiration in it and found aspirations for perfection. The Italian Renaissance was born from the sculptures collected in the Octagon. It is a magical place where everything began. Well, it's a special place. If you can feel the atmosphere of this courtyard, and in the works of art, you will feel the spirit of antiquity. In 1822, the Pinecone courtyard was enclosed by a new structure, the so-called Braccio Nuovo, the New Wing. Pius VII initiated a program to develop the museum's potential. At exactly this time, Pope Pius VII ordered the purchase of new works of art. He also issued another decree, which turned works of art found underground into public property. For this reason, the Vatican Museum could create a new collection. This was the beginning of the Chiaramonte Museum. When the works of art were returned to the Vatican after the Congress, a new museum building had to be built to house them. Si dovette costruire un nuovo museo per accoglierle e venne realizzato il Braccio Nuovo. The circle of history closes. In the new wing, the Nil is displayed, one of the first 3 antique sculptures introduced to the papal collection by Julius II. The 19th century was a good time for museums. The museums were enlarged with the addition of new departments. This is the Mannerist ceiling, frenzy of gildings, stuccos, colors and paintings. This is the ceiling of the Map Gallery, the former gallery of the Apostolic Palace. Pope George VII had a series of maps of Italian peninsula painted on the walls. The maps present the papal state, numerous republics, counties, regions occupied by the emperor. We find here maps of two marine republics, Venice, eternally at odds with the papacy, stubborn and independent. And right next to it, the Republic of Genoa, for centuries a supporter of the papacy, which hired war galleys, sailors and soldiers for the popes during the wars. At the entrance, there's the beautiful panorama and map, the siege of La Valletta, the capital city of Malta, by a Turkish force of 40,000. Defended by the Maltese knights, who had an army of only 9,000 soldiers. It's hard to take one size off the maps, and when we do, the ceiling floods our senses with a kaleidoscope of Mannerist colors, figures, and gilding. On the edge of the Vatican gardens, there's a lawn established by Pope Paul III in the 16th century. It's one of the more peaceful parts of the Vatican. For this reason, the Swiss guards often use it to practice drill. Across the lawn, the memory of the square garden, is the Pinacoteca building, which houses the Vatican's painting collections. When the collections of paintings returned to the Vatican after the Napoleonic plunder, they were placed in the Borgia family apartments and various other rooms. So the collection was scattered in a number of places. 100 years later, in 1932, Pinacoteca was established, an eclectic building and the final home of the Vatican collection of sacral painting. It took almost a year to move the whole collection to the new building. Raphael's Ascension was moved with special care. The Baroque, dramatic and tragic, full of the personal pain of the figures, the deposition by Caravaggio. The Baroque was a style which tried to persuade. It was the art of persuasion, the art of persuading people to the truths of faith. The Pinacoteca is one of the greatest collections of religious painting in the world. The pictures gathered here show the history of the styles and currents that ruled European religious painting. In the Pinacoteca, we can see how the presentation of biblical scenes has changed through the years, how the form of the figure of Christ, the Madonna, and the saints has developed over time. The Mannerist descent from the cross by Titian neighbors the almost ascetic paintings of Perugin, an ethereal Madonna, surrounded by figures frozen in respectful poses. The Madonna holding the infant Jesus. This painting used to hang in the Quirinal Palace in Rome, when popes used to live where present-day Italian presidents do today. This is the Madonna with Pears by Moretto di Brescia, following the painting style of Raphael. And finally, the pearl of the Vatican collection, a surprising painting and ahead of its time, St. Jerome by Leonardo da Vinci. Never finished, it went missing, then was found and included in the collection of Cardinal Fesch, an uncle of Napoleon Bonaparte, an unusual painting with an extraordinary history. Leonardo's work was sawn in two, and the main part with the face of St. Jerome was used to cover a stool in a shoemaker's workshop. The cardinal recognized the work at once and bought the stool from the shoemaker for a small price. In this way, it was possible to complete the unfinished work by Leonardo. It's not just the only work by Leonardo in the Vatican collection. It's also the only one south of Florence. It is the only Leonardo that we have in Rome. One more Titian, charmingly still, the portrait of a dog. The coronation of the Virgin. Filippo Lippi, a Florentine, Dominican monk deprived of the habit, a womanizer, a scandalmonger, an ingenious colorist to introduce delicate, fantastical landscapes into the background of his pictures. At last but not least, Giotto di Bondone, the triptych, painted by order for Cardinal Giacomo Caetani degli Stefaneschi, and used to decorate the Constantine Basilica. The look of Christ by Pancreato seems to pierce the spectator. The triptych and the Ascension, how different and yet both so moving. They enable us to understand the continuity of faith and how our civilization, our culture, our customs undergo continuous transformation. The Vatican museums pay tribute to them.